Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Global Sydney Night. We have quite a good presentation by one of our own, Craig from Imperma, which is one of our sponsors, and he promised me it's not going to be a sales pitch, so it's going to be good. So we're going to learn about RASP, which is a technology I think is widely underused and very advantageous to protect applications, so should be very informative. Now, some announcements. I'm happy to announce, I don't know if you saw that I canceled the Fire Club in December. The reason being is that we're going to have a Christmas party, and a cool Christmas party. Like, we organized a cool place. It's going to be a barbecue. We're going to have a short presentation, free drinks. It's going to be awesome. And we're working on that. So 8th of December, make sure you're available. It's gonna be mostly a socializing event with a very small presentation about training, but it's mostly about just having some free food and some free drinks with nice people. Another cool thing, another good announcement is we're going to be organizing the CTF for B-Side Sydney. We have a really cool CTF plan. Cannot divulge you the details yet of the exact way it's going to form, but it's going to be pretty cool. We making with the objective of being fun and format and like a good experience for everyone, more than actually being sort of like a formal CTF. So it should be like we're trying to make it fun. That's the objective. So that we'll all enjoy. With prizes, of course. So we got quite a few sponsors lined up, and then with really cool prizes we'll give throughout the activity. All right, so we got the Fire Club in October as usual, and and there are foods and drinks and stuff as usual. Anyway, it's all yours.
Right. Thank you, Rick. For those of you who know me, is there an echo? All right.
There is an echo, yeah.
Yeah, do you want to
From the computer.
check it mute maybe? Yeah, sure.
That's better. Right. So for those of you who know me, and I've been turning up to these things for a while now, my name's Craig Porter. I'm actually from Imperva. And as long as you guys don't ask me too technical questions, I won't sell to you. At Imperva, I'm actually responsible for the application security product line, so that's why I've got a keen interest in everything OWASP. And really, when I think about AppSec, I think about APIs, I think about bots, I think about application security, things like RASP. So today I wanted to really talk to you about RASP. I think it's one of those things that I've seen in the industry that is really underutilized, and so it has some really cool benefits that will help you guys on and help you guys actually protect your applications in real time and when they're out in production. I think a lot of application security gets you to a certain point in time, but it doesn't go further. So again, and then like I said, what I want to do is really sort of cover off some of those, what RASP actually does and what it's meant to do, where it actually sits in a sort of, let's say, defense in depth strategy, and then how to sort of, like I said, operationalize it. Okay. What I'll do is, I said, there are various different RASPs out there on the market, so I'll just quickly run through the different bits and pieces. So if you're considering it, these are some of the things you should be considering and some of the benefits of that solution. And then literally just, again, take you through some of the benefits and pitfalls of a RASP style technology. And then if we keep the questions to a minimum, we get to go to the pub. All right? That's where I do my best work. So what I want to sort of set the scene a little bit and try and think about RASP. So obviously, we have the top 5 application attacks. This is from a combination of what we see in OWASP, but also what we see coming across our WAF infrastructure. So it might not be aligned completely, but again, you see the style of attacks that we see in cross-site scripting, remote command execution. All you guys must have suffered through Log4j. These are some of the big attacks that are sort of happening out there. And one of the things that we saw because of Log4j is that 83% of your code isn't actually yours. Right? So you're developing a small component, but you're using third-party libraries, and those third-party libraries are getting infected, getting attacked. If I was a cyber criminal, I could go on and try and attack your site, break down your website, have a look and do some of those traditional things, or I can go into a repo and go and poison a third-party library. More bang for my buck, right? So again, how do we stop that, right? How do we stop things like 0 days? Because there's no known signature for it. And most of your WAFs and that sort of protection style technology, even the SAST and DAST tool, are using signatures to find where the problem is, right? And then what happens once you've released it, because you've got a sort of point in time issue. Another thing that came from Veracode, and I saw an updated version of this, it's actually gotten worse, 200 something days, NTT, White Hat Security. They reckon it took up to 200 days to fix a critical vulnerability. And again, if I go back to any of the supply chain attacks that we've had, essentially they come in, they'll actually attack your application or you'll load it up. They've avoided all your WAFs and everything else, right? They've actually been brought in by yourselves. So you then have to make a decision. What do I do with it? I wait for the patch. Once you wait for the patch, there's that 7 days of opportunity, right? The attackers have to actually infiltrate your system, right? And that's a sort of, an important piece, an important takeaway, because once they're in, they can just leave their little payload there. They can leave something in there and then come back later and create a backdoor, right? They can do all these things, and your application isn't protected. Again, 24% of those analyzed vulnerabilities there where it's being exploited, right? So again, as you're finding in that gap, a quarter of your applications are being exploited in that time. So again, this is an important thing, and this is why runtime or RASP is a really valid solution. Now, I don't know if you guys know, but RASP stands for Runtime Application Self Protection. It does what it says on the tin, right? It's a control that looks after the applications in runtime. And there are various techniques, which I'll get into in the next couple of slides, on how that does it. And each one has its benefits and failures. But it's one of those things that, again, I see a lot of organizations go, right, I've just released a new application or a new piece of functionality, or I've, deconstructed my application into microservices and I'm getting all the benefits from that. But then it goes through testing and a list, that list could be 2,000 vulnerabilities found. You don't know, you have to actually sit down there and risk it. Then somebody says, right, actually, I've only can see 3 or 4 vulnerabilities. And then are we going to slow down the release and deliver the thing without fixing it, or are we going to actually fix the patch or wait for a patch to be delivered? And then it's in the third-party library, right? So the vulnerability is found in the third-party library. What do you do with it? Do you call up the guys that wrote it and say, can you deliver me a patch now, or what? So a lot of stuff is ending up on risk registers. Right? RASP solves this problem because it's sitting there and it attaches it to yourself. Once you've built your application and released it, it should be a good RASP will be attached itself to the runtime environment, and we'll be looking at the request coming in and actually trying to work out what that request is doing, and then blocking or alerting you that there could be a problem. So when you find those vulnerabilities, especially with your critical apps, I probably wouldn't put RASP onto everything, but those critical apps that are probably dealing with, credit card information, PII data, or anything like that, you want to know, right? And this is where RASP comes in, and it's quite important because, again, it gives you that defense in depth sort of piece, which sort of I try to highlight in this. So most of you sort of the crown jewels of the data, right? The applications are accepting are actually looking at the data, or actually accessing the data and sending it back to wherever it needs to go, right? And there are different controls in there. everybody knows about the Cloud WAF. The Cloud WAF is tends to be a signature-based tool. It's really great at that first line of defense. It's really great looking for known problems. Right? Once it finds a known problem, it flags it up, it blocks it, depending on which sort of WAF you have. You also, sometimes within the WAF, whether you have to protect yourself from those automated attacks now. Those automated attacks bots are being weaponized, right? They're actually searching, they're going and looking at your endpoints again, and that's using a different technique, right? So stopping those bots at source is a great tool, and it actually stops things like them discovering your endpoints, them actually having a look at those sort of things, stealing, scraping your websites for your data. Things like account takeover, DDoS, again, both DDoS at the network level and at the application level. These are important. They give you that sort of defense in depth, right? But if I look at the WAF, and people ask me, oh, what's the difference between a WAF and RASP? Is that it has to be the different detection method, right? So a good RASP will use some sort of deterministic way. It'll actually try and evaluate what the request is doing. A poor RASP, and there's a few of them on the market, will actually just use signatures, right? And one in particular that they will take they use a signature base and they call it a next generation WAF, or they call it a RASP, and it's a firewall for an application. So it actually is no different from a WAF, but it actually sits at the application level, but it's all signature based. And then they wait for Log4j, they got those requests coming in, they looked at those requests, but they had to wait for a signature. What's the difference, right? So just be careful. For some RASP say that they're a RASP because they're at an application level, but they're no different. They're a signature-based solution. So if it gets through the WAF in the first instance and it hits the RASP that uses signatures, you've got no protection. So those are sort of important things to think about. And again, things like APIs and bots can deliver application attacks, right? And they do deliver it in different ways. But they're delivering some of the same like SQL injection attacks and things like that. But your API gateway is not going to pick up that they're not actually expecting the packet, right? The API call. So they don't know what's being delivered in an extended API stream, right? RASP will pick that. A good RASP will pick that up, and that's again another key distinction. Because what you're doing and what a good RASP does is look at every request coming into the application and then evaluating that request for whether it's good or bad. And I think that's the key piece. And then once it's got it, again, good RASP will tell you where the problem is, what line's being attacked. So you're not going through your log files and trying to find out what happened. You're not looking at timestamps. You're not looking at getting the developer to go and look through code. A good RASP will give you a stat trace, and you can actually look at that and go, right, this is the line of code that's being attacked. I need to go away and fix it. And don't get me wrong, RASPs in themselves, like I said, doesn't stop you from patching, right? They're a good mitigation control for patching, right? So if you want to release something out without patching, I mean, one of the things I say when we're talking DevOps, and I've got a slide of that in a minute, is that once it goes through your CI/CD pipeline and you find these vulnerabilities, you actually have a choice, right? You patch them or not. And we're saying don't not patch them, but take your time. Lift those up, put them into a new workload, but you can still release the application. And that's what a good RASP will do for you. So again, if you're trying to, like I said, deliver functionality every 2 week sprints, this will help you. This will stop slowing you down. But again, it doesn't stop you from not having to patch, right? You should still patch the application. You should still wait, but it gives you that, it takes away that risk. I mean, it reduces that 7 days, right, of where you're exposed, right? Or the 171 days that you didn't fix that critical vulnerability. So it's it's important. I'm going to stop and take a break. Does anybody have a question? Are you sort of getting where I'm going with this? Yeah?
So what's the input that's needed, right? What is the elementary that you're getting out of the application for RASP to work?
So again, it depends on how your RASP is going to work. So some RASPs will actually embed themselves into the runtime environment and actually inspect the traffic. These are the deterministic style RASP. The signature-based RASPs will literally be a file. So they'll intercept the request coming into the application, but they will then compare it to, they'll do a regex expression. Some apps that some RASP will require you to actually, a bit like an APM will get you to try and instrument the code. Right?
So is it still looking at the packets, or is it just the request headers itself?
Well, again, it depends, right? It depends on what that RASP is. So a good RASP will look at the packets themselves and evaluate the outcome of that packet, right? So it'll look at the call and go, right, this call is trying to achieve that. And that's when you say...
As in the TCP packet itself?
No, HTTP.
Okay, so that's looking
Yeah.
into the headers itself.
Correct. So what it will do, let's say, is the request comes into the application. It'll look at that request and say, right, this is what this is trying to do. And then with the deterministic style RASPs, what it will do is go, right, what is the outcome of that request going to look like? Or is that request always going to be true? Right? It's always going to be true. It's created a tautology. And then we'll look at the payload and go, right, is this going to do an SQL injection? Is it going to try and do cross-site scripting or anything? Right? It will go and look at that attack and then tell you that there's an alert, right? And that's where it gets in. Signature-based ones and the ones that you have to actually instrument yourself, that I'm not too familiar with those ones, except ones, like I said, glorified WAF. The other way too is that, and the other key criteria when you're evaluating a RASP style solution is, does it have to go out to the cloud for machine learning? Right? Does it use some sort of agent? That's a sort of, again, that's going to cause you a problem. Right? It's going to cause you latency issues. So there are a few RASPs on the market that will go out and say, right, I've seen this request, I'm going to check this request against my machine learning algorithms, and go, right, I know about this, I'm going to now stop it or alert you that there's a problem. That means that you have to pop a hole in your firewall, pop a hole in your application, and it needs access to those clouds. And then there's that gap too. Some of them try and get around it by putting an agent which fires backwards and forwards. That is not a good RASP. And then that creates problems further down the line when you're trying to embed RASP into your CI/CD pipeline, right? Because it needs the ability to get out. So that's where you sort of need to be clear. And these are the sort of detection methods that we're talking about, right? So most RASP will fall into one of these categories, and then most machine learning will probably use one of these style categories to actually determine whether that RASP or that request coming in is going to cause you a problem. So if we take it, again, we take the first one, pattern matching signatures. Again, performance issues with regex. You have to have signature updates, and again, it's like, well, what's the difference? If you put a WAF in front of it, you get a better bang for your buck. You're protecting more applications. Why find a RASP that's going to do this? Because it's no better than a WAF. Then we get down into heuristics. Now, heuristics uses multi-criteria analysis, but what it's actually doing is that it's has a very high false positive rate. I probably know 2 or 3 different RASPs on the market that use heuristics, right, to actually determine whether there's a problem. But that's the sort of statistical method, right? And it's not going to actually help you. And I think I've put it somewhere down here. Because it's using that statistical method, it subverts the actual, if you get more bad behavior, it actually skews the findings. So that's how you're getting a lot more false positives. It's actually not actually inspecting anything, right? It just goes, right, I've seen this thing, this occurred so many times, and it's an issue. The data flow analytics piece is a bit like the APMs. You actually have to instrument your code. So it's up to the dev to make sure that he's instrumented his code or put the flags in the right place in order to inspect the problem. And like I said, that's again hit and miss, right? You've got to assume, and the poor old devs, when I'm talking to devs about things like RASP, and they go, and I say shift left, they always say to tell me shift left means more work, right? For me, that's not what you want to do. It's not what you want to do with your application security program. What you want to try and do is automate this as much as possible. So again, it's with the whole data flow, it's looking at the way that HTTP variables make their way into the SQL query. And again, it's a really hit and miss thing. So I then get down to something called LangSec, and LangSec is language theoretic security, and there's all sorts of papers on it. But this is where you get that deterministic model, right? Where it actually looks at the request coming in, evaluates that request, looks for a bad behavior, and then flags it up. Because you're using something like LangSec, it actually understands the payloads, it understands the database. It's a sort of grammar-based technique, so it knows what it's doing. So it knows what .NET framework expects to output and the queries, and it checks it. It's a bit like compilation, right? It's a bit like a little sandbox in front. So we intercept the request, we process the request, look at what the outcome is, and see if that request is malicious. If it's malicious, then we flag it or block it, and if not malicious, we pass it through to the application. Now, again, when you're talking about deterministic, the thing is, where does that little engine or that little agent sit, right? That's the important thing. Because if it's not sitting up in a cloud somewhere, you're going to add latency, right? And if you're looking at a critical app, you're looking at a card-based or payment style app that's doing credit card information, that's going to cause you problems, right? You need to actually embed the runtime libraries for RASP in the runtime itself. And that's something that I'll get into in a little bit more detail later. So those are the different, again, techniques for RASP. And again, it's important because this is where a lot of people invest a lot of money and say, right, I'm protecting my application, but they've chosen a signature-based one. Well, it's done nothing more than bring the protection closer to the application itself. But it's no different. Hasn't given you any in-depth, hasn't given you any comfort levels. Again, heuristics, it's statistically based. So again, you're going to get a lot more false positives, and you're going to get skewed numbers, right? And then eventually, the more false positives you get, the more you're going to ignore, the more redundant it is. So again, look for, like I said, quote unquote, look for those things that use LangSec or deterministic. There's 3 or 4 of them out there, and then, like I said, just double check where the processing is happening, right? Because that's key.
Except for probably LangSec, the first 3 can still be done through WAF, right?
Some of them, like I said, with the data flow analytics and the heuristics, I've seen them done, and like I said, that's what they call the next generation WAF. Let's say marketing got a hold of it. If you see next generation WAF, that's probably what they're using. So a little bit more than signatures, but it's built into the machine learning algorithms, and they're using those sort of techniques. And that'll again get you to a certain point, right? I think where RASP comes into its own is that bottom section, that ability to actually understand what the request is doing.
And how do you extract the query out of LangSec? Say if I'm trying to execute a command, it's an HTTPS traffic, right? So it's not visible. How are you extracting that?
So again, that comes into the back end of RASP. The Langsec is just using to do the evaluation piece. Once it gets in there, that's where you then need to understand how the RASP then takes care of it. Now, I can only talk about my RASP, but essentially what we will do is that we then have a set of controls and say, right, this application can do this application can do that. We can whitelist IPs, you can do, and that's what you need to look for, right? So for instance, you take Log4j, right? When it did that, tried to execute that remote command, we would have said, no, this can't block it. We would have seen that it went to a command and control server that wasn't a part or whitelist. And a good RASP will create a positive security model, right? So it's going to stop anything that it doesn't know. So again, one of the things with any RASP that you're talking about is that you have whilst they're probably easy to put in, it's always good, especially if you make big changes or putting in a new application, to socialize it. So have it running in monitor mode.
Yes, so at what point you are decrypting that information and extracting that command? Before it is hitting the application or after?
So yeah, and again, I can only talk to because we're in the runtime.
Yeah.
We get the decrypted traffic.
Okay.
Other solutions, they will have to.
RASP is sitting in runtime, so it is already
Correct. So yeah, so what we will do is give you a certain three files. One's a library file, and when you go to build, and I think you're asking me all the right questions. Have you seen this before, right?
Yeah.
So, a good RASP, right, and that doesn't need that whole going up into the cloud and will get essentially built into the RASP. So I'll just put it into an npm package. I'll say, right, these are my three files. This is my configuration file. This is my agent or library file, and it gets built and it gets compiled into that runtime, and it just sits there, right? And then what it will do is like I said, you can flip it into monitor mode. You can put it into just do nothing mode. What I suggest is that for 6 weeks you sort of have it there and running. But the important bit is that that your DevOps write the code. You're still using your tools, right? We're not saying don't use the SAST and DAST tools, right? We're not using code scanning tools. Use them. Get as close as you can to do it. Then when you go into to build your application, embed the RASP there. Right? Again, that's the key point. Because guess what? That stops all those latency questions. It stops all a good RASP will have this capability, right? And then, like I said, it sits there pretty much like a sandbox in front of the application itself, intercepts the request, evaluates the request, takes the decision, right? It will tell you what it's done. If you put it in the monitor mode, if you put it in blocking mode, it will do that. But the great thing with RASP, and we work very well, so you still run your SAST and DAST testing, right? But in particular, SAST will give you a list of vulnerabilities, right? And then a good RASP can take those vulnerabilities and configure itself. So it'll go, right, I know that these vulnerabilities are in the app. And coming back to the whole releasing, like I said, work with various testing tools. We'll take that report, configure the runtime solution based on that report, and then that app's protected. It gets then out through the release point, and away you go, right? And now you can take those vulnerabilities, evaluate them at your own leisure. You can fix them, decide which ones you want to patch, which ones you want to go on your risk register, and this RASP will then be there protecting those applications. So you don't lose any time, right? You've released your application online, you got your bonuses, you met your framework, and away you go. Then, where a good RASP really makes its day then is because it's evaluating the request, because it knows things, and it's where the signature bases fail, right? Signature base, they don't know it. Heuristics won't necessarily pick up a 0-day. Machine learning evaluation criteria have to learn, right? So again, that deterministic Langsec evaluation criteria is key because it's evaluating every request, so it will know that there's zero. It doesn't need to know that there's zero there, right? It just knows that this request came in, it evaluated that request, this is going to be bad. Protected from day one. Supply chain, exactly the same thing. The underlying libraries change, you don't have to worry about it because it's evaluated that each and every request, it's completely agnostic from that. And it gives you that bit. And then once you do, is that when you're running in a operation, suddenly you've got all this metrics, right, from within the application to actually tell you where the problem is. Because at the moment, you've done your SAST and DAST testing, you've done all your code analysis, you've fixed everything up, then you release it over to production, and it depends on what the devs are logging, right, to see where the problem is. But now you've got RASP in there, and it's evaluating all that. It'll tell you within where the things happen. So suddenly you have all this application level statistics that you've never had before, where the attack's coming, what line of code it's coming into, etc. So it's very, very handy for that point of thing. How am I doing for time? So I'm still talking. I think I've got one slide left, but any questions around that CI/CD yet?
Just more about Langsec. So you mentioned like the dynamically evaluating things at one time. What are the compute considerations? Like, wouldn't you have to, if you're baking into your app, let's say, would you have to consider scaling up your instance size for your server that it's running on because it needs to do that? Or
Yes. Like I said, we got some statistics, but for again, it will depend on the RASP itself, but I can only talk to the RASP we provide, but 2 or 3%, maximum. Again, if your application is poorly designed and it's got a performance issue, we're going to exacerbate that problem, right? That's just sort of clear. But essentially, because it's already baked into the runtime, it's usually about 2 to 3%, probably a couple of milliseconds of latency. So again, it's again, and this comes back to the whole piece. Try and understand how that, so when you do talk to somebody about RASP, and it's not me, then make sure you understand how they're evaluating, A, what they're using to evaluate, B, and then where they're actually evaluating, right? Because that's what's going to cause you the hit and the problems. And it's either going to be latency or it's going to be CPU.
So you mentioned so the RASP, if it's working on the Langsec method, wouldn't it take more time than the other 3 methods?
Well,
and would it cause latency issues?
not necessarily. Again, so if the agent, for want of a better word, is sitting in the runtime environment, it's just an extra step, right? So it's not going anywhere. So you don't really get that latency. If it has to go up to a cloud or it has to perform a regex for signatures, that's going to cause more latency than the actual application, the evaluation of the request, right? And again, we can prove that. I can sort of benchmark your application ahead of it, and we do suggest it as part of a proof of concept. Benchmark it, and then we'll come back and plug RASP into it, and then just put it into monitor mode. So again, it will just do that evaluation. And again, what we're seeing is 2 to 3%. And again, yeah.
So the performance would depend on the server that you're using, as well as how well structured your application is.
Correct. So again, it's, if you think about it, it's just for want of a better word, a sandbox that sits. It's a little bit like the APMs, right? The same sort of technique. The requests are coming in, it goes to the APM before. So if you're using an APM, we prefer to be in front of the APM, only because we just want to actually evaluate the request before it goes anywhere else. If it comes into the APM first, then it might not necessarily get passed to us, right? So again, it's something to be mindful of, but any of your application performance management tools use pretty much the same technique, right? Of intercepting, evaluating, passing it on. And that's the sort of, again, the key thing. And then, like I said, because LangSec is, and the deterministic methods look to do that evaluation pretty much in real time, it's not, it doesn't really, we've got quite a number of, mission critical apps, as I said too. You wouldn't put this on any app, put it on the mission critical ones that are exchanging important data, right? Because if they get attacked, that's accessing PII data, it's accessing PCI data. You want to be able to stop this. So, yeah, does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah.
And like I said, this is something, I don't want to say it here, but call me later and I can show you a demo, right? And show you actually how this all fires up. But again, it's, again, you guys have all probably lived through the number of different supply chain attacks, right? And what did you do? You waited for a patch, then you had to test the patch, then you had to, implement, and then suddenly 2 days later, a new patch came because the vulnerability had, evolved.
Yeah.
And then you went through that same process, and some of you guys lost weeks, right? Imagine that critical application had a RASP on it. You wouldn't need to patch it. You could have waited, you could have put that patch, evaluated it, stuck it in your standard release cycle, and off you go, right? You would have bought yourself a long time and a lot less effort, because we would have stopped it.
Just a hypothetical question. So RASP is going to see the same amount of traffic that application is going to see.
Yep.
And application is not going to react till RASP passes it.
Correct.
So what happens if the RASP is not able to handle the load? So will my application suffer to respond, or will RASP let it go because it's too overwhelming? Because it's piggybacking on the same infrastructure where the application is. So what's the fail-safe there?
That's a good question.
Because application is not going to react to any request till RASP has cleared it, right?
Yes.
And if RASP is struggling to cope up with the volume, then what happens to the application?
Yeah. The application won't get the request, but to be honest, I've never seen that. Not.
Never seen is not like it will not happen.
No.
Because the next
Yeah.
question that's actually coming my target question is, what if I DDoS RASP? That's pretty much possible right now. What happens to the application?
Yeah.
So what's that?
But what happens to your application anyway when you get DDoS? So that's why, if you go back a couple of slides, right?
That's a different question, right? Because if my application can handle, say, 1 million requests a second
Mm-hmm.
versus RASP can only handle 500.
Yeah.
I can still DDoS RASP pretty easily. Then I can.
Yeah.
DDoS.
Let me take that away. Let me talk to the.
That's why I said hypothetical. question.
Yeah.
Because WAF can handle that much of load.
Yeah.
So should I then do a combination of WAF plus RASP so that WAF takes off majority of the load and RASP is still safe? Or can I take it off RASP?
Yeah.
And take
Yeah.
all
So
the load?
again, if we come back to this slide, right?
Yeah.
What we're talking about here is, you protect your front door, right? You protect your front door from the standard sort of problems that they're not actually getting through. Again, with bots, right? Different types of bots that are out there.
Yeah.
They can be sophisticated, they could be cycling through different IP addresses. Block it there. Block those attacks from ever hitting your actual endpoints. This is where defense in depth comes in, right? If you don't have that capability of stopping your bots, you're actually paying. So an interesting thing around bots is that almost what we see across our infrastructure is 30% of the traffic that's hitting websites that are under our control or behind our WAF infrastructure is bot traffic. And of that bot traffic, of that 30%, 60% is advanced bots, so things that are very hard to pick up, things that are mimicking browsers, mimicking users, right? Stop it, all right? Again, because what that happens is that if you can stop it at source, then you've freed up 30%, right? You're not paying for that 30% compute. You're not paying for the usage of your bandwidth, right? All that goes. You can either use that to either save some money or improve the user experience. You've actually stopped it there. Same with APIs, right? The ability to discover and look at APIs and see what packets are coming through, making sure that it's not go beyond authorization and authentication, right? Have a look at what these are doing, looking for those logic flaws. I mean, APIs, are getting used and abused because they're easy. The bots are going searching them, creating the Swagger file based on what they're discovering, and then they're being exploited, right? Put something in place, right? Then get to the RASP. And again, as I said to you before, it's great. Put it for your critical applications, because if you have that defensive depth strategy and each one will block different things, right? Then this is your last line of defense before it gets to your data, all right? One of the cool things that we can do with RASP, this is not, but is if an attack comes through, you should. Well, I can take out there. I can tell you what IP address, what device, and everything from the WAF. Pass it through RASP to see the actual what request was, and then pass that to DAM. So when you have a database attack, I can actually tell you who did it. Right? This way when you're talking about applications, right? I mean, people talk about the transformation, right? It's not just a question of sticking a WAF in front of it. It's not just a question of securing the Kubernetes container. You might as well just secure the server, all right? Think about the application security. Think about what that means to your business, right? Because that's where you've got to do it. And then, I said, this is all great, right, for public-facing applications, right? This is all really good to stop those attacks happening. What RASP is doing, it's big thing, and it said it in the beginning, right? Supply chain in 0 days. It's that last line of defense, the things that you don't know about, things that are coming. So that's, if you have all these other bits in place, it just really does its job. Stick a RASP out there by itself, you probably have the problem that you're describing. But I will get back to you
Sure.
on those, on what that control is in terms of being able to mitigate that sort of issue. Now, right, I decided not to be negative because I ran out of boxes and I put too many on there. But again, when you guys are thinking about RASP, and this is important, it is a part of that defensive depth strategy. But what it is, again, it's recommended by NIST as a control against supply chain in 0 days. When we're talking about supply chain and 0 days, and funnily enough, NIST and all those guys, what do they come out with? A bill of materials. Right? Well, what are you going to do? Get your programmers to write down or get some scanning to happen? Interestingly enough, a good RASP will be able to give you that bill of materials. It knows every library, every request that's coming in, and it will note that down for you. Right? So, and actually, the whatever the version is, right, of that bill of materials. So you don't have to go through and scan your repos and work out what you're using. A good RASP will give you that. This is the one I love because you're releasing, you're being asked to release new functionality every 2 weeks, or whatever your cycle is, right? But you have, once you get to the release part and your SAS and DAS testing is completed, you've got this list of vulnerabilities. What do you do? 9 times out of 10, they end up on risk register, never to be seen again. Right? Or you stick, you know, I said for those critical apps, you stick a RASP on it, you then release it, it's now protected in real time. It's protected in production. It has some, you know, again, with the SAST and DAST tools, like every time you run it through, it's whatever they know about at that given time, right? No other test, right? So no 0 days, no supply chain. It will test for certain things that it knows, and then you release it, and your application is pretty much unprotected unless it's sitting behind a file. And even then, that file was only looking for known attacks. The other bit I like is that if you do this well, right, you can get a lot of great information you just don't have at the moment, right? So your ops teams have just go, oh, we're under attack. What's happened? I don't know. Here, go and look at this bit of code. And the guy, poor old Dad, is sitting there looking at lines of code trying to find out where the attack happened. A good RASP, and a RASP that's evaluating the request, will tell you exactly where it happened. It will dump a stack trace out for you, and you go, right, there it is. I can quickly fix that. And it gives you that level of vulnerability. And then, more importantly, it's buying down risk. Because at the moment, you know, we all started off in applications that are running on a web server and a data center. You just protected the perimeter. Right? Things are now moving to the cloud. And then you expect the cloud service provider to secure and do that. But then those applications now, if you're using microservices or serverless technology, fire up and disappear. Well, how do you protect that? Right? Again, because there's, you know, you can protect the Kubernetes container, but it's not protecting what that application is processing. And that, you know, if you look at a lot of the attacks now that these got, you know, that RASP has, you know, defined, that they're all application level attacks. And that's the key thing, where it comes in via an API, comes in via a bot, it's important. So I'm getting thirsty. I reckon we've got about, anybody got any questions? Because that's pretty much it for me in terms of RASP. Again, like I said, I think I have a soft spot for RASPs because when I first got into cybersecurity, I said, look, Craig, we've got this tool here that nobody knows what to do with. And it's a great application security tool that, you know, just seems to keep getting forgotten. And I don't know if it was because of hype or whatever, but it actually solves some really cool problems, i.e. supply chain attacks in 0 days.
So does it stay with the, let's say, code, or it is physically separated from code? Although it is working with the code, definitely. But if we think about deploying our architecture-wise, maybe to reduce the latency, maybe in future to improve the caching, if I architect in that way, I'm just thinking like, is it a better way, because this is a gate pass from where a bit traffic will pass to actual applications. So is it recommended to keep it separate, or should it be part of, because there might be many things, those are predefined there, and there might be some customizable things depending upon the database, let's say columns, etc., that can be specific to different applications. So how do you see that?
So, and again, that's going to depend on the RASP that you're using. So one of the things I was talking to Rick about was, you know, I could probably count 5 RASP that I know about pretty well in my head. If you go to We Hack Purple, they actually have a list of 40. I didn't even know there were 40, right? So again, and it comes back to how the RASP is implemented, right? And like I said, there are many different ways that can be done. So again, the first pass is looking at how it detects, right? How it's finding things. So things like caching and things like that, it's probably not going to help with regex, right? But if I go back into and again, I highly recommend you guys, like I said, if you're going to think about RASP, think about that deterministic Langsec style evaluation criteria, because with that, it actually it embeds itself in the front. So again, adding cache and things like that won't necessarily be too much of a benefit. And it does come back to your question, right, about that. How do we scale? And how do you actually scale? Again, you could probably split the application up. Again, with a good RASP, it doesn't really matter, right? You can break down your application, run many versions so you don't hit that limit. But I will find out what that limit is, right? In terms of requests. So yeah, that it's all going to depend on how the RASP that you take is implemented. Does it go up to the cloud? Does it act as a firewall in front of the application? Or is it smart? Does it embed itself into the runtime without any code changes, without any air gap? It's one of those sort of RASP. There's probably 4 of them on the market that can have that capability. Then you don't have to worry about it. It will just pick it up, just like an APM, pick it up, look at it, pass it on. Pick it up, pass it on.
Does it have any policy engine or everything attached to it? So it is attached with it. It's not lagging anywhere.
Yeah, I can't talk about the other one, but I can talk about mine.
Yeah.
In that, and it's a simple thing. It's literally 3 files: the agent file, which is the runtime, the library, the Langsec library. It has an output file, so that's where all it just dumps it. So you suck it up into any tool that you want, any scene that you want, and you pull it in. And then there's a configuration file. And what we do is, I said, we use that configuration file. And the beauty of the configuration file is that if you're the AppSec guy, you don't need to know how to code. It's a GUI, it's a policy-based engine that says, right, can I do this? Can I write this? Can I execute these commands? These are the IP addresses left. These are the database. It goes down to database level. And it can be a bit daunting, but it's really a checkbox. Once you've done that, and once you sort of spent that 6 weeks socializing it, you can go through and click. That then gets, when you add it to the runtime library, it gets imported, and it becomes...
That policy engine is centralized, or is it local to that application?
Now it's local to the application. Well, the configuration element is centralized,
Yeah,
but then it dumps down a file, which then you then attached with the build process.
So can I ask a question again? Maybe I missed that. What if there is any dependency between the RASP and the technology of the runtime?
Yes. Well, right. Yes, in my instance, right? In my instance, because we're using that Langsec grammar-based thing, we need to understand what the runtime is. So, and like I said, we need to understand how .NET processes and evaluates the request coming in. How do they do it in Python? How do they do? So we support quite a number of those.
But depending on the runtime technology, your
Correct.
instance of RASP will be different.
It'll have a different grammar for it. So if you want to add something new, so currently we don't support Ruby, right? So we don't have a runtime for Ruby. But again, we would have to then work through and create the grammar for it and understand how Ruby processes its requests and executes, and then we'll do it from there.
You mentioned it was it compiles things. Is it like compile or like evaluate the requests, like with expressions?
It evaluates it like a compiler does, right? Yeah. So essentially, that's. But there again, it'll depend on what RASP you decide. So if you decide that you want one of those deterministic grammar-based ones, yes, it will treat it like a compiler. It will evaluate each request just like a compiler. However, if you're using machine learning, it means that you pop it out to the cloud, see what's happening, and you get the request. Yeah, this one's good. It's really your choice, and really it comes back down to latency, and it comes back down to your network peak, right?
How's the Incredible one work?
Sorry.
No, it's RFP.
Yeah.
We bend the
I can't really talk about that. So
On day,
you can give me a call later on, and
I was just curious how it works, because it's different languages. Some are interpreted, some are compiled. So how would you evaluate expressions for interpret that language? Yeah.
I'll get your number, and I'll give you a call, and I'll run through that with you.
So this RASP study, the the vulnerability or libraries we are using, or does it just have like a general rule that for LangSec?
Again, it will depend on that. So what will happen is that in the term of deterministic or LangSec variety of RASP, it will actually look at each request. So it doesn't, if that request is called up via a library or through a library, it will just evaluate it, right? That's why it can do that supply chain attack. Whereas the signature-based machine learning won't be able to actually do that because it has to understand or it has to learn this is an issue, right? Signature-based, you have to actually go through and give it a new signature to actually be able to tell that this is from this library. Whereas because we're evaluating that request, we don't care where that request came from. When you've compiled it all up and you've got your code, all the different libraries, it's a request.
I heard the point, because one of the things that like at this time is like saying that RASP is a like not well utilized technology.
Yep.
How accessible is this today though? Because then there's a lot of like things that go like through open source, right? So like a developer, they would try to play with something, right? So let's say with like WAFs, for example, you can get a basically free tier on Cloudflare and basically go with that.
Yep.
How accessible is like really like REST solutions to people to actually learn about it?
Oh, sorry. Look, that will depend on the vendor, right? But yeah.
But as like in the market, is this like something that's like there is actually options for like let's say I don't work for an enterprise that actually can sink a ton of money in a like an enterprise solution.
Mm-hmm.
Is there like a market for like some smaller companies or smaller teams to get into RASP? Because then it's a very specialized technology. So let's say putting something into your runtime like in Java, like something into JVM, right? When you have good open source solutions that it's like a layer above. So let's say you're going to do like Falco, right? That's going to do intrusion detection on like listening to kernel calls. It just feels to me that I think REST would like really cool, but I think one of the things with the adoption might be that I actually never had the opportunity to just like play with it and then see like how like I would recommend to my company, hey, perhaps you should do RASP unless they sponsor my time to play with the RASP. So I think there's like that's the question. Like it's pretty cool, but is it approachable for like non-enterprises?
Yeah, look, to be fair, our one probably isn't. It's available for a proof of concept, so I can install it.
Yeah.
Can you play with it? Can you download it from GitHub free version? I don't have one. Some other companies may have one, but I've never seen a RASP out there within any of the Gits that are freeware. Maybe there's a couple. But then again, too, once you sort of picked it up and pulled it out, writing the grammar for a language like LangSec, right, or deterministic model, is quite a bit of effort, right? So, yeah, there might be a RASP out there that will do it, but is it actually going to tick your boxes? Is it really going to be the thing? Again, it's a unique bit of technology, but yeah, look, if you want, I can help you with a POC on my stuff, but
the reason why it's like it's that's why, because you might actually know if there's like things in the market or in the open source. It's like it's not about getting the best technology in the sense like, hey, this one in the line set or something, but then even like, hey, this is not great, but then I can get my hands on RASP and understand like how a RASP operates, for example.
Look, the only other place I found RASP was React Perfect, right? And I don't know what they're doing these days because their sort of site sort of disappeared and they got bought out by somebody, right?
Yeah.
They had a list of 40 something RASPs, right? So you probably want to start there. Just go to GitLab, do a search.
They have a community, so we have Purple is now a community in Mighty Networks. It's free and it's open source. So I can send you the thing. They have the 3 courses. You remember application security?
Yeah.
They are free now, so you can and they have the list in there.
Oh, cool.
So,
Yeah.
It's all
I mean, the
available.
section on RASP is
Send you
about
the
this
link.
big, like it's pretty small. But again, it's one of those technologies that I haven't seen in like I said, in any of the capture the flag platforms or anything. So, again, I don't know why.
Yeah, 'cause I think, especially with the RASP, there's a bit of like overlap of responsibilities, right? Let's say the security team wants to put a WAF on top of like whatever, they put a WAF on top of whatever. Getting something that's going to be embedded into the runtime that's going to be running applications, and the security team is usually not responsible for the operation of the application. It's kind of a harder sell, I guess. Like,
Yeah.
hey, you really should put this into your application. So I guess that's why it's like, important, I guess, to like try out things and then be accessible to development teams, I guess.
Yeah, without a doubt. Without a doubt. I think it's, I hope you can get out. Ricky. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. Well, but that was it.
Yeah, look, let me get back to, because I'll be interested to find out. I've never seen somewhere where you can go and find a RASP player.
Me neither, and I look for them, and I think it's one of those new technologies they keep it in, like, really commercialized because there is so much money in it.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah.
Is Langsec proprietary to Imperva, or is
No.
it standard library?
It is, so the guy that, he's our CTO at the moment, that built our RASP that we bought the organization from, just happened to be sitting at a lecture at university at MIT. And they started talking about Langsec, yes. And funnily enough, his day job was application security, right? So his day job was what we're doing now, right? And he went, I could use this. And he built it. And he built it using Langsec, right? Yes, there you go. And then Imperva went and said, that looks cool, we'll buy it. And they bought it. And now, I said again, I come from a payments and compliance background, so security is pretty much embedded into pretty much everything. Right? You just can't make a credit card payment without, can't have a gateway without security. Everything's is pretty, coming out of payments and compliance and into the real world, there's been a bit of a shock. I mean, why are you guys doing this? Why? And then one of the things when looking at the sort of application security space, everybody else talks about that, right? Talks about this, but they're all struggling with patching, with vulnerability management, with this, and then suddenly there's this tool that nobody's really aware of. This solves a lot of problems, right? That, everything's becoming an application. So, and the application is, no longer tied to a data center, a server, a data center. The serverless stuff, is fires up, performance function goes away. But it's still an entry point into your data, right? It's still a mechanism to steal stuff. Right? You need to have a control. Step in now.
Oh, yeah.
I need beer now. I need beer.
All right, let's give a round of applause to our presenters. Thank you very much. You care about what it's a swear word in this forum, sir. So yeah, thank you very much. Great presentation, and for highlighting all the benefits of using a RASP. As I said, we have Purple is a free community, an open source community. Tanya, I forgot her surname. What's her name? She's the founder, and she makes all the things, just lists and maintain of all the open source and tools in there. So happy to share the link to anyone that wants. There are very good courses there about application security, explain how it works, and because it's quite a good place to go to and learn about things. I go there all the time. So if anyone wants the link, just send me an email, rick.camp@ovas.org, and I'll send you the info. So I might put out the comments in the YouTube if I remember. Anyway, thank you very much, guys. I didn't see any questions online, so if there are any more questions, send it through Discord. We'll hit him up. And yeah, thank you, guys. Okay.
And then the last question. How about the compliance of this library?
Sorry?
So how credible this library? There are different libraries.